is diversity? Is it characteristics you were born with, like race or sex? Is it characteristics you're exposed to, like culture, beliefs, background, or interest? How much do these two factors truly overlap? Is it more of nature or nurture when it comes to what true diversity really means?
We have gathered here to talk about DEI in the workforce, and it's quite funny that we are all actually a very diverse group. We're all MBA students at the University of Alaska in Corey Collison's Leadership and Organizational Behavior class, but we all come from different backgrounds. I'm Gergana Dero, and I moved to Alaska 8 years ago after finishing my bachelor's degree in economics in Bulgaria, where I grew up.
My name is Jan. I grew up in Austria and moved here 4 years ago to do my undergrad in finance and to join the ski team.
I'm Nathan. I was born and raised in the southern United States, and I moved here to Alaska while in high school. I did my undergrad in economics, and I hope to someday own and operate my own business.
So today we will talk about a couple of different things. We will start by telling the history of DEI, why it started and what issues it aimed to address. We will also provide some examples of where it worked well as cases where it didn't, and along with the reasons of that. We will then conclude with a conversation of how to handle diversity when it comes to hiring within your company.
So to start things off, we're going to go over the history and why DEI started in the first place. Diversity is obviously a broad array of factors. However, for the purpose of this podcast, we are really going to focus in on two key factors that were considered when diversity began to be something we really thought about as a society. But before doing that, we will begin with a brief overview of the historical movement that started it all, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act was passed during a period of widespread racial segregation and discrimination in the United States. Its purpose was to dismantle systemic inequalities in areas such as education, employment, voting, and access to public spaces. The law made discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin illegal, marking a major milestone in the nation's push towards equal rights. A central component of the Act, Title VII, provided employers, labor organizations, and employment agencies from discriminating in hiring, firing, compensation, and other employment conditions. It also banned practices that segregated or limited opportunities for workers based on protected characteristics. Beyond employment, the Act outlawed segregation in public accommodations, federally funded programs, and educational institutions, ending legally sanctioned discrimination in everyday public life. These protections laid the groundwork for future civil rights laws addressing gender equality, disability rights, and other forms of identity-based discrimination. Now, Gary, can you tell us a bit more about the factor that started this movement altogether, race?
In DEI work, race should be understood as a social and cultural construct, not just skin color. It reflects shared ancestry, history, and cultural expressions such as language, food, and values. Racism occurs when society ranks these groups as superior or inferior and uses cultural and or historical differences to justify unequal treatment. Understanding race in the broader sense helps DEI initiatives look beyond appearance and address deeper issues of power, representation, and respect. Racism is based on false belief that humanity is divided into biologically distinct races, a notion historically used to justify slavery, colonialism, and inequality. It operates both through personal prejudice and through institutions that perpetuate disparities in wealth, education, and justice. While slavery existed in many regions, the Atlantic slave trade shaped the modern racial hierarchies, whose effects remain visible today despite significant legal and social progress.
Now that we have a better understanding of the history of race, Jan, why don't you tell us a bit more about the other leading historical component of diversity, sex?
The addition of sex in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act is actually a pretty interesting part of its history. The original drafts of the Civil Rights Act did not include sex among the protected categories. They focused on race, color, religion, and nationality. Sex was later added as an amendment during a debate. Some people say that this was done to make the bill weaker. But to the surprise of many people, the final bill passed with the sex amendment in Title VII, prohibiting employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or nationality. This later addition helps to explain why early enforcement often failed to address issues like pregnancy, sexual orientation, or gender identity. So after sex being added to the Civil Rights Act, initially courts interpreted sex narrowly, covering only distinctions between male and female or pregnancy-related issues. The Title VII's text did not explicitly include sexual orientation or gender identity. Over time, the EEOC and courts broadened this understanding, and in Bostock versus Clayton County in 2020, the US Supreme Court ruled that discrimination against gay or transgender employees is discrimination because of sex. Today, the EEOC defines sex to include pregnancy, sexual orientation, and transgender status, confirming that Title VII protects LGBT employees under its sex clause.
Now that we have a better understanding of the history, let's look more into how DEI looks in action through evaluating some individual case studies and research. Gary, can you open this conversation by discussing the case you reviewed where DEI was successfully implemented?
Yeah, I was researching about companies that have great DEI initiatives, and honestly, it was hard to conclude the best company. Some of the companies that were included on multiple researches were like Johnson & Johnson, Apple, Cisco, Costco, Delta Airlines, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Microsoft, Elf Beauty, and Salesforce. All companies I researched shared strong companies combined targets, transparency, and structural supports from like training, research groups, accountability, rather than just setting a goal. Having these diverse population is only part of the story. Diversity in management and leadership is especially important because it influences culture, decisions, role models, and inclusion. I dug a little bit deeper in a company called Unilever, and that maybe some of you don't know it, but they own a big companies like Dove, Hellmann's, like your favorite mayo, Ben & Jerry's, Magnum, and Domestos. Unilever uses algorithmic screening, game-based assessments, and video interviews to reduce bias. Candidates play a series of online games. They're designed to test traits like memory, risk-taking, and focus. Then submit a video interview. The first cuts are done by algorithms, not humans. And why I determined that this actually works is because there is fairness and equity. Decisions are based on what candidates can do, not on what they are or what they came from. Efficiency, automated or digital assessment tools speed up screening and free up human time. Diversity and performance, by focusing on potential companies, can include more represented candidates, which strengthens innovation and long-term outcomes. And accountability, data-driven monitoring and structured processes make it easier to spot and correct biases.
Awesome, thanks for sharing, Gary. Now, Jan, can you tell us a bit more about the other side of the coin and discuss a case where diversity initiatives backfired?
Yeah, I can do that. I found some interesting articles about companies that performed worse using DEI programs. One interesting article I found was published by the City Journal and is called Why Boeing Killed DEI. The article about Boeing argues that the company took measures to remove its DEI program and change their way of hiring because insiders of the company felt that the initiative oversold imaginary return on investment and split critical resources and headcount from core engineering, production, and quality functions. The article states that DEI became tied to status and compensation rather than performance, and that in a manufacturing or engineering heavy business, this shift cancelled out performance-based culture and focus on excellence. Boeing executive reportedly judged that they cannot keep production in focus while also allowing an external focused bureaucracy with weak ideas to drive culture. The report I found doesn't present public data showing profits dropped because of DEI, but it presents the case that Boeing leadership believed DEI had become a negative factor in their performance culture and therefore made the decision to stop it. The question that is being asked before making decisions now is always, does it help us to build airplanes? So now that we have looked at the case studies showing how DEI can success or fail, I'm going to pass the torch to Nathan. He'll provide a broader view of DEI in the workspace by drawing on academic studies that examine many organizations rather than individual examples.
Thanks, Jan. One study that I looked at was published by the American Sociological Review and assessed the efficacy of corporate affirmative action and diversity policies. They analyzed federal workplace data from 708 private sector organizations between 1971 and 2002, combining it with survey information on their employment practices to systematically assess the effectiveness of various diversity initiatives. The study's authors identified 3 types of diversity initiatives: assigning responsibility, things such as having a diversity officer or a task force; 2, training managers alongside giving feedback to reduce bias; and 3, programs that try to ease social isolation, such as mentoring and networks. They found that the first type of diversity initiative, which establishes responsibility, led to the largest increase in managerial diversity. Conversely, the second type of diversity initiatives, which work to moderate managerial bias through diversity training and evaluations, were least effective in increasing diversity. These findings indicate that efforts focusing on training bias or mentoring without structural accountability, such as defining responsibilities and metrics, have a significantly lesser impact than those with a hiring policy that establishes accountability, metrics, and structure, leading to substantially better outcomes. Diversity tools that rely on voluntary attitude rather than punitive reactions tend to fail because they make no real effort to redesign decision structures. The second study I looked at was one by the Psychological Bulletin. Although helpful, the American Sociological Review study I previously discussed prioritizes diversity as an end goal in of itself rather than as a means for a more productive, efficient, and cohesive workplace. This study by the Psychological Bulletin conducted a comprehensive meta-analysis and synthesized over 85 years of research on personal selection methods to determine which hiring practices best predict job performance. By utilizing thousands of studies, the authors of this paper compared the predictive validity of 19 different tools, such as cognitive ability tests, work samples, and structured/unstructured interviews to see which combinations of these tools bring about the most reliable and fair hiring outcomes. They found that the three combinations with the highest multivariate validity were general mental ability plus a work sample, which had a mean validity of 0.63, GMA, or general mental ability, plus an integrity test, which had a mean validity of 0.65, and general mental ability plus a structured interview, which had mean validity of 0.63. In addition to what works, they also found what didn't work, meaning it was invalid and or unfair. The first of these was unstructured interviews, which were low in reliability, poor at predicting performance, and highly susceptible to bias. The next was subjective evaluations, also known as gut feeling, which were shown to inflate bias and reduce quality. Other tools shown to be low in validity include handwriting analysis, graphology, and unvalidated personality quizzes, which all performed at near chance levels. They also observed an over-reliance on referrals, which introduced network bias and limited diversity. These findings matter for diversity in hiring because they show that when your hiring processes use less valid tools, you're more likely to hire people who do not perform well or make decisions that are more prone to inconsistency and bias. By using high validity structured selection tools, managers can better select for good performance and reduce bias of risk, which is more likely with unstructured tools that allow greater discretion and implicit bias. While much of the evidence points towards the importance of structure and accountability in hiring in management systems, it is worth noting that not all DEI efforts produce clear or lasting results. A recent systematic review published in the journal Translational Behavior Medicine of diversity, equity, and inclusion in anti-racism training studies over the past 2 decades found that although many organizations invest heavily in DEI programs, there is limited and inconsistent evidence that these initiatives lead to sustained behavioral change, performance improvement, or lower turnover. This suggests that training on its own, without changes to decision-making structures, leadership accountability, and workplace culture, often produce modest or short-lived outcomes. Altogether, these findings show that DEI initiatives are most effective when they move beyond awareness or education alone and instead embed equity and inclusion directly into hiring systems, performance evaluations, and organizational practices.
Now we're going to move into the conversation piece of this episode and hopefully have a productive and insightful discussion on best hiring practices. In this conversation, we will take a closer look at successful DEI practices for hiring a productive, diverse workforce and which practices to avoid.
I think a good place to start with this conversation is kind of taking a look at reactive versus proactive DEI initiatives. I think reactive ones are something like, oh shoot, like half our workforce is white and the other half is Asian. We need to hire more Black and Latino people within our workforce. And it's more of a gut reaction being like, we need to fix this issue, rather than a proactive one, which is, hey, let's have hiring decisions that are oriented towards finding a diverse group of people who can provide different insights and working to mitigate factors that may increase discrimination. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think having a proactive approach gives you a lot more opportunities to find the right people for the job. If you have to react to maybe a bad performance because of a lack of diversity, you just have to try to get more diversity in your company, and you might not look at performance-based measures. You might just hire based on diversity. But I feel like if you are taking a proactive approach, you actually have the option to look at performance and hire a diverse workforce, and you have more time to do that. So I think, that's my take on that.
Yeah, and it all starts with interviewing and actually hiring people. It's quite important to interview and just make the selection very to reduce bias. And that how to reduce bias, it's always oh yeah, you need to reduce bias, but how do you do it? Very easy. You need to have structures, standardized interviews, and predefined evaluation criteria. That way everybody has the same grounds for fighting for the spot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that goes back into those studies I talked a little bit about, and working to have things like diversity officers, task forces, requiring reporting, and having structured interviews that look for certain characteristics that may look for things that are more diverse and performance-based rather than purely what's your skin color, what's your race. Things like general mental ability, work samples, integrity tests, and structured interviews that don't lean more into the vibe where you may be more similar to relate to someone who's more similar to you, and working to make sure that we're actually measuring things that are objective and the same for everyone so that everyone has an opportunity to get in the door.
Yeah. Actually, did you guys hear me talking about the Unilever? Yeah. It's so interesting that they incorporated games for people to just be able to be evaluated and create a decision-making data instead of just having an interview and using your gut feeling.
Yeah, and I think with those games, there's more different outcomes that you can be looking at rather than I'm looking for X, Y, and Z. People can put out whatever combination of letters that they're able to, and as long as that's a good output, you can reward that rather than penalizing it for maybe not fitting exactly the kind of box that you had in mind.
what I also like about some interview practices, I think it's a good idea to have some anonymous interviews, like some outcomes, and you can just have a fully, like, make a decision just based on the outcome of that and don't have a face like corresponding to that interview. I think that's a good way to judge interviews. And I think it's really important actually to build a fair and diverse decision making system after those interviews. And I think for that it's also very important to have like diverse interview panels and some very broad talent pipelines.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and you actually touched an interesting point. While you were being like in interviewing process, I found and researched this new technique called masking or anonymized screening or blind hiring. It removes the information that identifies maybe age or when they finished school or names, and that way people don't make biases decisions. They are able to actually make decisions on the actual data that will help this person to be hired or what is actually important for the job, not specifically for who they are, where they're from, or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to have, especially there was a study that had been done years ago. I think they've actually repeated it multiple times, but it was a kind of economic study where it filed 83,000 fake job applicants at 11,000 entry-level positions of Fortune 500 companies. And they found that a typical employer called the presumably white applicants 9% more than black ones. Now that number rose to roughly 24% of the worst offenders. So something as simple as like a name on a resume or a cover letter can implicitly create bias that makes people less likely to want to move someone forward in that hiring process. Even when the resume, the qualifications, all of that are exactly the same. And that's why I think having something like anonymized screening may actually be a great tool for getting a more diverse workforce when you're not even considering it whatsoever, because it works to combat some of that bias that we might not even be aware of.
Okay, yeah, I think those are all very interesting points. I think now it's a good time to move on to our next point and talk a little bit more about ensuring transparency. I think that kind of adds on to like the anonymous interviewing and those things, because I think doing all of those things, it's very important for the interviewees to know what they expect in the interview and how we kind of quantify their results. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it also kind of works as a form of insurance on the form of the company, where if someone's going to give a complaint and say, hey, you didn't hire me because I'm black, or you didn't hire me because I'm a man, if you have that documentation, like what you're talking about, Jan, you have proof that you can pull back and say, actually, no, here's the process, here are the metrics that we're looking for, you applying universally across all candidates, and you didn't check this thing that we're looking for. And it could even be something that is in somewhat correlated to diversity, like we're looking for someone who has connections to Alaska Native cultures and has a better understanding of that group, because that's something that our organization works with. And maybe someone who's Alaska Native is more likely to have those experiences, but maybe not. But as long as you have that proof of that's what we were looking for, and this person demonstrated that they have more of that experience, you can have insurance to go and protect yourself from being legally challenged on that.
Yeah, that actually leads us to the last point that we wanted to talk about, is where diversity has, like, does diversity initiatives have place at work or not, and when they are, like, when diversity teams are amazing and when actually diversity is maybe not as important at work. We're talking all about like being high performers or looking into performance more than who we are and reduce biases. But there are jobs that maybe sometimes they are not important to have connections or contacts with other people. It's more about data and information and processing it. What do you guys think about this?
I actually think this topic kind of leads back to what I've been talking about before with the company example, like with Boeing. So I kind of like that approach, like not really, like it doesn't really matter how much diversity you have. Like the most important thing is to have success in your company. Like usually more diversity leads to more success. But I think what companies should focus on most is have a successful company and build around that. And I think a diverse workforce will actually improve success, but it should not be the main goal to have more diversity. But if you have success as the main focus, I think this will lead to more diversity and more success.
Yeah, I mean, I think certain jobs definitely benefit more from diversity than others do. Like if you were leading a counseling agency or something, I think it's really important to have a diverse group of people who can relate and connect to people with different experiences, not just one type of person. But if you're having something like, you know, an assembly line of people just putting together widgets, I don't think it necessarily matters that much whether it's an Asian person creating your widget, a white person creating your widget, a short person creating your widget, or a big person creating your widget.
Yeah, it's all about actual performance.
Yeah, and I think this is a good example, like different jobs need a different balance of diversity, I feel like. If I like to think about it like with childcare, for example, like it's usually a job where more female like employees are working, but I think if kids are just spend time with women every day, all day, that might not be the best thing. So it might be beneficial for the kids to have diversity there.
Yeah, and I think that can also apply to like schools and stuff like that, where if you have all female teachers, you know, if you're a student in that place, a lot of those kids may not have kind of a father figure or someone at home, and having some male teachers there at the school who kids can kind of connect with and have kind of maybe a more masculine figure kind of that they can go to may be super beneficial. Or conversely, if it's something like, you know, you're a woman who really wants to be an engineer and you go to work for an engineering firm and it's all men there, I think that can be a really intimidating thing and something that might not make you feel welcome. You might kind of self-select out of that career force, even though it might be something that's interesting to you.
Yeah, through my research, I definitely find that STEM teams have been proven to be really good when they have diverse teams, because they bring up different points and different ideas, which is great. But at the same time, it's not only having the diverse team of, oh yeah, you're gonna hire women or you're gonna hire men or whatever race we're talking about. It's all about giving these people a chance to actually say their ideas and give them opportunities to grow. And again, maybe we can be diverse or we don't need to be diverse. It's all about giving them voice.
Yeah, I think now we've been talking about diversity in sex. I think like a good example is also like nationality. Like if you look at like jobs in finance, for example, if you work with portfolio manager or financial advisors, if you have people in your team from different countries, different people might have different knowledge on different markets. So I think that's a pretty good diversity too, to know more about companies in different countries.
Yeah, and I think one thing that sometimes we might not think about initially is some jobs actually might be kind of anti-diversity in a certain way, where like if you have a Chinese restaurant, it might actually be in the service of your company or thing to hire all Chinese speaking employees or all Chinese employees to kind of create that cultural experience. Or like we talked about in class, if you're like hiring Hooters waitresses, like there's a very kind of specific type of person you're probably looking for that job, and you probably don't want to hire the like 40-year-old bearded guy to be your Hooters waitress. So there's different stuff like that can get a little bit more complicated when you actually are selecting for very not diverse groups. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think the Chinese restaurant and Hooters are actually great examples. It shows that some companies benefit from a lot of diversity, and some companies might actually don't want diversity at all. I think, as I mentioned before, in the end, the most important thing for a company is to be successful. And in the end, they have to decide on their own how much diversity they want and how much diversity they can have to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think diversity is something that, generally speaking, you as a company should want to keep your doors open to as many people as possible. Not just from a legal standpoint because you have to, but also just there's a lot of benefits that you get from having different thoughts and opinions in your company. But I think with that, you also want to evaluate how valuable is diversity in your individual company context. If you're manufacturing widgets, it might not be super valuable, and you might be kind of indifferent to it. Whereas if you're a Chinese restaurant or Hooters, you might want a very specific type of person to work that job. However, if you're like a teacher or a therapist, you might want a large amount of people who can connect with different groups and speak to different experiences. So I think with that, we can all generally agree that diversity is something that's valuable. And I think from a company aspect, it should just be how high up on this hierarchy is it, and how much weight are we going to give it in our hiring process, where you're not discriminating against people, you're keeping the door open to as many people as possible. But you can have diversity as part of that in your structured interview process is something that you value and you measure based on people's responses.
Yeah, and really build up these companies to have positive and inclusive climate for all voices, psychological safety, and allowing members to actually speak up without fear, and equal status and clear roles, like that, reducing the imbalances in the power, and shared goals. It's all about the goal of success of a company, and what actually brings the success. It's all the decision of the decision makers, really. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I think with that, the two biggest takeaways I got, at least from this conversation, are that generally we want to make sure to keep as many doors open and have rigid processes in place that allow a large amount of people to come in and open through that door. But you also need to evaluate yourself and the company on a base-by-base basis and not put diversity on this pedestal of the most important thing always, because it's contextual and it matters of what you're looking for. A lot of what Jan was talking about of, does it help you build a better airplane? And I think with that, I feel like we've had a really productive conversation.
Yeah, that is a wrap.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening. I hope this conversation has been as productive for you as it has been for us. And have a great Christmas break.
Thank you.
Thank you.